President Franklin Roosevelt brought the federal minimum wage to life in the 1930s. Today, there's a federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour that hasn't changed since 2009. And we have one here in Michigan that's higher, at $9.65 an hour. But the number most work and family advocates are pushing for now is $15 an hour. Sean Egan, Deputy Director of Labor and Economic Opportunity for the state of Michigan, explains why.
So a family of four in Michigan is determined to need about $61,000 a year just to get by. So when we start to think about a $15 an hour minimum wage times two, that's around that number, right?
It's estimated almost 1 million workers make $12 an hour or less. And the fight for workers to have higher wages has been an ongoing battle for Dr. Siku Sibi, head of Restaurant Opportunities United.
The statistics with those area where you increase the minimum wage, what happened is those workers now, those millions of workers now increase their purchasing, potential. What happened when they can buy more, it improves the economy as a whole. And that when that economy improves, those businesses can hire more people.
But not everyone supports a higher minimum wage. Citing potential job loss and larger costs for small business, former Reagan White House council member Peter Wallison questions whether we should have a minimum wage at all.
I have some real questions about whether in this day and age it is really necessary anymore. And I think it does much more harm than good. Fewer people would have jobs. Mm-hmm. There would be fewer businesses started. Every time it becomes necessary to raise the wage, it makes it more difficult for people like that in 95% of the businesses to hire anyone.
According to the Congressional Budget Office, if the federal minimum wage rose to $15, projected job losses could be as high as 2.7 million, or as low as 0.
So I think we would find, similar to the Congressional Budget Office, that there may be some impact to employment, but it's so negligible, it's hard to even find.
What about hiring? Critics argue if a worker's pay is more than their employer thinks their work is worth, businesses won't hire and may even fire their low-wage employees. That would disproportionately impact women, immigrants, and Black low-wage workers. While barriers to education, job training, and wealth creation have held back many in these communities, forcing a higher minimum wage could add to the problem.
We have a very large group of people in the United States who are unemployable, it seems. No matter what policies we follow, we find these people, mostly people of color, who remain unemployed. And the reason for that, in my view, is that they are trying to enter the labor system. They are trying to enter the system of production in this country, but they don't get a chance. And the reason that I think they're not getting this chance is that wages are too high for the skills that they have as entries.
Being a server requires tons of skill. Being a cook also requires tons of skill. So the idea that because they are Black, because they are brown, because they are immigrant, we shouldn't pay them, and using this narrative according to which it is because they're low skilled that they should be paid that low is it is just not true and need to be debunked.
Detroit native Sarah Coffey is also an activist for restaurant workers and is currently with the National Lawyers Guild and Restaurant Opportunity Centers United.
Well, as a woman whose first job was at Little Caesars and who has worked in the restaurant industry off and on, I would say that if someone cannot afford to pay their workers a living wage, that they should go back to the drawing board with their business model.
How do you respond to people who make the argument that the minimum wage is okay because it's restaurant workers, because it's high school students, college students just getting, their first job, and they need to learn, the basic tenets of what it is to be a part of the workforce?
That's an absolute myth. There are many parents, working families who are making the sub-minimum tipped wage and the minimum wage, and it's not enough to survive on.
Although the policy debate is primarily split down party lines, overall, Americans are in favor of a federal minimum wage hike. According to a 2019 Pew Research Center survey, 2/3 of Americans favor a $15 minimum wage.
In Florida, a state where the majority of voters voted to re-elect Donald Trump, the minimum wage referendum passed by over 60% of the vote. And I can't actually think of that many things that 60% of Americans agree on these days.
Professor Luke Schaefer at the Ford School for Public Policy at the University of Michigan says, even with a wage hike, solving poverty will remain a major challenge.
If you really want to target poverty, there are these other ways to do it. And the child tax credit being one of them, to say raising kids is expensive, and no matter what your earnings are, you should be able to put food on the table, you should be able to pay your rent. And so the child allowance basically does what most other countries do, that says the government has a reason to make sure that like children are cared for, right? And help parents to do their job of raising their kids as best as they can.
A federal minimum wage hike to $15 was part of the most recent COVID relief package, but was removed in order to get the bill passed. At the federal level, the minimum wage is at a standstill, but major corporations like Target and Costco have committed to paying their employees $15 an hour. In Michigan, earlier this month, House Bill number 4413 was introduced to amend the Improved Workforce Opportunity Wage Act, which would raise the minimum wage to $11 by 2022 and $15 by 2026.
So do we want to continue to live in a society that values money over people, and that unfairly advantages the wealthy over the poor?
The only path out of poverty is work. And when we have low minimum wages, low unionization rates, big inequality, that path is not that clear. So you can be working in this country and still living in poverty. That is a shame. And that is something that as a society, we should not accept or tolerate.